Gamers of Reddit that lived in the 90s. What's the biggest shocker you had on your gaming journey? Being able to save your progress was revolutionary. Before that, it was either writing down long ass passwords or straight up restarting from the beginning. I grew up with the OG Tomb Raider on PS1. Saves were a limited resource. Most puzzles required trial and error to solve, and in this case the error is almost always death. You didn't want to waste a precious save, because what if there's a harder section later? This almost always leads you to having to replay half a level over again when you die. This was covered by the game's creator in the commentary track when they made the anniversary edition of Tomb Raider. He mentions that one of the early sections of the game contained a rushing river that would throw you back to the beginning of a jumping and climbing puzzle. He said this was a nicer way of having a fail state without sending you hours back into the level. He notes that, now that it was being made on a modern game system, the waterfall puzzle was almost more cruel now because, with autosaves being what they are, it would almost be easier to die and reload than be shoved back down the climbing puzzle. The hilarious part was when we went backwards in time on that, going to the PlayStation from Super Nintendo/Genesis, and now you can no longer save, since cartridges weren't a thing anymore. Child me and out of touch parents didn't know you needed to buy a memory card to go with your very expensive game console. When 3D cards started to become mainstream in PC gaming in the late 90s, the original Tomb Raider was one of the first games I played both in regular 3D and accelerated 3D, and the difference was night and day. It looked and moved so much better. Probably the concept of living through the 90s being no longer the norm in the community. I read accounts of people talking about the super old system they grew up on, only to find out they're talking about a GameCube or a PS2. Excuse me, I have to go affix an onion to my belt. Ocarina of Time at the Forest Temple. I saw a shadow of something that was apparently on top of my character, so I stopped moving, got close to the screen, and looked as it got bigger. Before I could react, yup, Wallmaster. Sonic and Knuckles. It was a Sega Genesis cartridge game. There was a complete plot and you could play through the entire game as either Sonic or Knuckles, with slight differences to both the story and gameplay for each. The really crazy part, though, was that the top of the game cartridge opened up, and you could plug in either Sonic the Hedgehog 2 or 3. If you plugged in Sonic 3 it would allow you to play through both Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles. The two games were developed concurrently and released at about the same time, with a bunch of added features / gameplay. If you plugged in Sonic 2, which came out 2 years before the other games, it let you play through all of Sonic 2 as Knuckles, which dramatically changed gameplay in some way. If you plugged in any other game it let you play a mini game. I had Sonic 2, since it came out. Suddenly getting to play the same game as a different playable character who hadn't appeared in the original game, and with new gameplay features totally blew my mind. Today we would see it as a DLC expansion or playable character, but at the time I'd never seen anything like it. I was working at Toys R Us in the mid-90s. This old guy came in looking for a video game for his grandson's birthday present. He asked me if we had Sonny and Knack. I told him there was no such game. Did he mean Sonic and Knuckles? He got mad and insisted it was Sonny and Knack. He even showed me the note that his 6-year-old grandson wrote him, asking for that game. He said his grandson knew how to play a ton of video games and was, therefore, way too smart to make a mistake like that. In the end, he refused to consider he and his grandson could have gotten the name wrong, so he left in a bad mood, calling me a fool. Probably when I was 9 and first played Doom. I couldn't play it in the dark because it was too scary. The original Doom. I got in huge trouble because my dad brought home a hacked version of Wolfenstein 3D. All the Nazi tapestries were reskinned into really pixelated Playboy pictures. I had no idea this wasn't okay though. My parents just hadn't conditioned me to fear and scorn nudity. So along comes my random 3rd grade friend, and we sit down to play some Wolfenstein. He thinks it's the best, and we play for hours. Then he goes home and tells his parents about the nudes and violence. The parents call and are really upset about the titties, but not the gore, murder, and Nazi stuff. Best part is my dad's coworker asked my dad why he let his son play something like that. He thought the game was for my dad lol. Dad bought me Duke 3D when I was 12. Shake it baby. The introduction of online games / worlds blew my mind. Early on, I had a family member that played MUDs, but they read a lot faster than me, so I just had them explain what was happening, but it was still cool. The first online games that I played on my own were Neopets and EverQuest around 1999. I was infatuated. I can't put into words how fantastic it was to be present at the cusp of the internet being integrated with games. Here's how revolutionary that game was. I once stood at the Target N64 demo kiosk for 20 minutes just running around the outside of the castle and swimming in the lake and moat. The gateways to the actual levels are all inside the castle. I was having the time of my life playing a non-level. It's good game design, though. Miyamoto has always stressed teaching the mechanics in a simple way before throwing players into any real challenges. GoldenEye. There had been multiplayer games before, but playing this with mates all night after the pub was an added level of competitiveness. Still prefer that to playing online and not being able to give the same level of abuse to friends. I think CNC was the first game I ever played that had live action cinematics with real actors in between missions. It was the first time I could really compare the story of a game to something like a movie or TV show. The writing was bad and the acting was worse, but it looked like a movie. Then CNC, Red Alert 2 had the actress Carrie Weira, who 14-year-old me already had a huge crush on from Sliders. That blew my mind seeing an actor I knew from a TV show in a video game. How amazing new games were in the 90s. On the PC it seemed like every new game had vastly improved graphics compared to the last one. PC hardware was improving so fast back then. Not that much difference now even over 10 years. And similarly how quickly their requirements went up. Computing power grew at an incredible rate. An expensive desktop could only keep up with the newest games for maybe 2 years before they started outpacing its hardware. It still blows my mind that I can get 5+ years out of my PC before I have to upgrade the GPU, and even longer before a full upgrade. As a dumb middle schooler, learning that the different characters in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 were actual skateboarders blew my fucking mind. Although they were all just randomly generated skaters with made up names like Rodney Mullen or Chad Muska. I liked video games from when I was quite little, but I think MGS was what set me on the path to being a gamer. It isn't blew me and my older brother away when we first played it in my cousins. Then the following Christmas my aunt bought us a PS, and we eventually got MGS and the rest is history. I'd say I've easily played through that game 20 times or more. The first time I saw a fatality in Mortal Kombat. Half the fun of that game was the rumors that surrounded it. When that one proved to be true, I was both blown away and delighted. I loved Star Wars Rebel Assault when I was a kid. Last night, I played Battlefront 2nd, single player campaign, for the first time. When I started zooming around in that TIE fighter, the first thought that came to my mind was I would have absolutely 100% broken my little kid brain if I could time travel back and show my young self this game. The sheer scale of progress we've made in such a short time is staggering. Pokemon Red and Blue and the invention of the link cable. I could not believe I was actually trading Pokemon from one cartridge to the next, and we could actually fight each other. Microtransactions. I seriously can't fucking believe that players actually defend microtransactions. It's not just reluctant acceptance, it's gotten to the point where people actually defend them now. It bums me out. Playing devil's advocate, the cost to buy games hasn't increased significantly in the past 20 or more. I'm not super versed in the history of game prices, but the cost to make them has increased, and due to inflation the actual value of $60 has gone down. The developers and publishers need ways to ensure they make a profit on the games, so instead of increasing the price of the game from $60, they include microtransactions. I still hate them, but I understand the reason for them in a lot of games. The graphical jump between console generations, more specifically with two game series I played a lot, namely Gran Turismo 2 to Gran Turismo 3 and Final Fantasy 7 to Final Fantasy X, and in Final Fantasy's case, considering I never played 9th until around 2007, it was quite the jump to say the least. The advent of Game Genie and Gamma Shark and Pelican Codebreaker. They allowed you to essentially make and enter in cheat codes that would alter the game to give you double/triple experience points, maximum level O items, or extra money, etc. Some could be even used to make the game do things that weren't possible in the retail version of the game. Lem tell ya, it's something else to start playing a bunch of Final Fantasy games with maximum out stats. There was even a method in Final Fantasy IX with Gamma Shark that allowed Beatrix to remain in your party, if I remember right. Epic times indeed. Beyond that was online gaming on the Sega Dreamcast. That shit was unreal to me. Phantasy Star Online 1 blew my mind. I think I started playing Socom 2 sometime later on PS2 and that was it. Slightly later than the 90s, when Nintendo invented the Gamma Boy SP, it absolutely blew my mind that Gamma Boys could be backlit. No more clip-on magnifying glass plus coily light combos to be able to play Yoshi's Island in the dark. Plus, it could fold. Playing Rome Total War for the first time. Having so many units on screen at once, and being able to zoom in and see them individually fighting. The fact that games have stayed $60 all these years. Edit, I know prices have started going up. Point being, with inflation considered, game prices have stayed impressively stable in comparison to almost everything else. $60 in 1990 is worth $119 in 2020 for your consideration. The Rumble Pack. Having physical feedback blew my mind. I can honestly say that sometimes I'm playing a game now, and it hits me how much more intuitive Gamma plays because of the feedback from my controller. In retrospect, I know this is kinda lame, but 13-year-old me was absolutely blown away when Karrigan emerged from that chrysalis in StarCraft. Another time I remember being floored, along with my entire family, is when I booted up a PS2 for the first time and popped in FFX. Me and my family, who appreciated games but weren't gamers themselves, were stunned by the intro cinematics and soundtrack. There was a game on the original Nintendo called Star Tropics that came with a letter from your in-game uncle that you are trying to rescue. Later on in the game, it prompts you to dip the letter in water to reveal a secret code that you could then enter into the game to continue progressing. It was pretty mind-blowing at the time, and I wish more current games did things like this. Probably the Sega CD. The game it came with, Sewer Shark, was not great, but it was real video playing, and I was controlling it. There was a guy talking to me. It had an opening video and everything. It really came to a head with Resident Evil. A full intro that felt like a Tromaville horror movie, but was clear and easy to understand. Then the game starts, and the people we just saw a video of were kind of clearly represented on the screen. Wow. There's a shot in Resident Evil after the dog hallway where you get a good look at the character model. I remember just going there and admiring how good the characters looked. Not real, just wow, look at all the detail on this character. My first mind-blown moment is pretty trivial in retrospect, but it's Gamma Boy Robocop. It was the first time I experienced being able to shoot upwards and diagonally instead of just horizontally. And of course the jump to 3D was insane. I specifically remember watching the Mario 64 trailer on TV and just imagining the possibilities. Then we got speakers to the PC. Played Diablo, Warcraft 2 and StarCraft with no sound. Then we got speakers after 3 to 4 years. That was fucking amazing. I was so overwhelmed when I saw the 3D graphics in Mario 64 when the N64 first came out. I told my parents I didn't want an N64 yet because I didn't think my 8-year-old brain was ready for that level of technology. For me, it's how far gaming as a whole has come over my lifetime. Visuals going from fucking Pong on the Atari 2600 when I was a little girl to things like Cyberpunk and the continually amazing evolution of the Final Fantasy series. Multiplayer going from 2-player games where you had to take turns to MMORPGs where you can play with or against millions of other players from all over the world. From EarthQuest, Zelda and the first Final Fantasy to massive open worlds. From a 2-sentence backstory in the game manual to deep and detailed storytelling experiences, where your actions actually determine the story, rather than the story railroading your actions. The advent of VR. It's a whole different world, and it keeps evolving. I can only imagine what it will look like in another 45 years. Maybe by then we'll be full William Gibson mode, and I'll be in a nursing home somewhere with my brain permanently jacked into my favorite MMO. The massive change from software to hardware rendering. We had Unreal that looked really good already under software rendering, but my jaw dropped when we got a Voodoo to card, and one of the bigger enemies was now ghostly invisible and gave off a soft glow. The thing that revolutionized gaming for me, and gets pretty much taken for granted now, was wireless controllers. Before that, you were locked into a position a few feet from a TV. Multiplayer was a mess of cables and multi-tap extensions. You were always afraid a dog or a toddler or something was going to snag the cord and pull your $$ game system off the shelf and break it. Even playing by yourself, the controller cord would get pretty annoying. Online gaming and how fun it was to play against a lot of other people. I played Counter-Strike when it came out, and LAN parties were cool. Somehow we got it on the school computers and would skip study hall and break into the computer lab to play. When systems started to ask, "Are you sure you want to overwrite this file?" Before that, and even during the early days, I saved over a lot of gaming that made me want to chuck the console straight through my tiny ass TV. The difference between PS1/Saturn visuals and Dreamcast visuals. The leap was significant. I remember working at Best Buy when the Dreamcast was released and NFL 2K on display. A lady pointed it out to her there to see how it looked so much like watching football on TV. My friends who didn't play games were amazed how Soul Calibur looked. I remember the first time I was blown away by the graphics was looking at screenshots of Splinter Cell, the first one I think. It had the main character standing behind a chain link fence with a bright light shining on it / him, and the grid of the fence was being projected onto him as a shadow. Seeing things in 3D for the first time was cool, but not mind-blowing. Shadows detailed like that, though. Playing together, but never meeting people. I grew up on Atari and the original Nintendo. Then I got into PC games. I recall playing Scorched Earth as a freshman in the dorms with a group of whoever stumbled into the room. I then got into some strategy games like Command and Conquer or StarCraft and FPS like Duke Nukem, Doom, Quake 2nd and Unreal Tournament. I did a fair bit online back when finding a server was challenging. Used GameSpy or actually typed in a address, but there were frequent LAN parties as well. My grades weren't the best, and I dropped out of school for a bit. I quit playing as much after I got married and went back to school and took another 3 years to finish an engineering degree. After graduation, I got a new PC and an Xbox. Gaming just wasn't the same when a 12-year-old was telling me all about how my mother's sexual performance was lacking over a network connection. So many. Playing Sonic 2 as Knuckles after putting it in the SNK cart was insane. Trading Pokemon across a link cable with someone else. The introduction of memory cards so I could take my game progress to a buddy's house. The introduction of real 3D to consoles was mind-blowing. Hard drives so you could install DLC. Online multiplayer on consoles. Mods on consoles. Skyrim on Zbone, for example. Super Mario Maker. New things are constantly happening that surprise me and change the industry, and I'm thrilled every time. I used to wake up every day and start Pokémon Red from the beginning because I didn't know saving was a thing. For months, I thought that you had to finish the whole game in one day. Finally an older kid showed me the save function, and it blew my mind. The jump from Northeast to SNES was mind-blowing. Not just the changes in graphics, but the length and complexity of games. Street Fighter 2 was light years ahead of anything comparable on Northeasts, like pro wrestling. Warcraft 2nd was the first RTS for many people. It was an entirely new concept in gaming. The atmosphere in Diablo I, the first time you heard the butcher say fresh meat, and the freedom and creativity of Fallout 1. That was the first game I ever stayed up all night playing. It was utterly absorbing. Murdering scientists in Half-Life 1. Man, that was both shocking that they let you do that, but amazing that you had that much control over the protagonist. Kind of leaves it up to your imagination. Was Gordon a psycho? We know he probably isn't now, but back in '98 we were asking that question. Probably when I first played Legend of Dragoon. 4-disc RPG on PS1. My best friend and I rented it from Blockbuster every weekend for several months until we finally completed the game. It was then I knew I'd be a lifelong gamer. Well, the graphics. How I could be so amazed before, and looking back, it was pure shit compared to today's games. This might seem like a weird one, but serious Sam. Generally speaking, today we have enough graphical processing power to just deal with stuff like this. I remember I could get Battlefield 1942 to lag horribly on a specific map by generating an infinite loop. If the enemy saw you, they'd usually drop to prone or kneeling. However, on this particular map there was an arch bridge, so dropping down under the right conditions could generate a lows check while standing, but no lows check while stopped. So the AI would just stand there and bob up and down. A 16v16 would cripple my then top of the line computer. Serious Sam on the other hand figured out a few tricks on pre-catching as well as visual representation, such that they could put an enormous number of enemies on the screen at the same time without slowing down the computer at all. 300 enemies on screen was not a problem and ran insanely smooth, like flawlessly, on a computer 1/5 the power and 1/10 the graphical processing of the one that struggled with BF 1942. That blew my mind. There's that, and how often really common issues related to basic computer problems still affect large gaming companies. Examples are Blizzard with Overwatch and object model collisions, wargaming and pre-catching information for smoother gameplay, and enormous patch sizes. Edit. Also how cheap computers are now. My 1992 budget for a computer, just to get a big hard drive, would get you a really good computer now. $4,500. GoldenEye on N64. In Germany I never read about it before release, never saw the movie. I knew of James Bond of course, and didn't have high expectations when renting it from the video store. I actually went in to rent another game, but went with GoldenEye, because the other game was already rented. From the first second I played I absolutely loved it. The funny NPCs' faces, hit animations, sound, gunplay and excellent multiplayer took me completely by surprise. I immediately asked my grandma to buy it for me, since she was the only one who'd buy me 18+ games back then. I was about 10 at the time. The biggest shocker is that now these days you don't need an memory card in order to save your progress. Back then if you were in a game and you had to go, you needed to insert an memory card to store your gameplay. The memory card itself was expensive, it was like an price of a new game, and that too back in the 90s lol. Now you have this thing called the cloud that saves it for you and automatically saves your progress. Is amazing. How much cameras fucked up the gaming experience when first transitioning from 2D to 3D. Suddenly there was something to be complained about in literally every single 3D game that wasn't first person. Something that had to be managed while playing the game. Something that would bounce off of walls or cause you to miss jumps because it was spontaneously pointing the opposite direction. Forward is now backward, and you were looking at your character's face for whatever reason. Thankfully, with enough iteration, it's gotten to a good point nowadays, but there are still camera issues from time to time in modern games too. I remember playing Castle Wolfenstein on a friend's console of some sort, probably in the 80s. I remember when I first saw Wolfenstein in the 90s. My work colleagues all came to look, because no one had ever seen a FPS like that. The graphics moved in real time as you moved the mouse. Aiming and shooting looked much more frantic and real than anything we'd ever seen. A bit later came Doom, which had internet play in addition to those really fast FPS graphics. People made mods and servers were hosted for a variety of different games, like Capture the Flag, etc. I only played at work, because I didn't have a fancy computer at home, and the internet would have been slow. The jump in game sizes. Hero's Quest, now Quest for Glory, was 4 whole 3.5-inch discs, and everyone I know was so blown away by how big it was. Everyone knew that games were getting insanely huge at all of 5 MB. Then Myst came out like 6 months later on something like 4 CDs, and was a little over 700 MB. The size of games jumping that much, all for graphics, was mind-bending.